Welcome. We are opening the file today on a really pivotal moment in modern Indian history.
Yay.
It's a moment that perfectly illustrates the incredible friction between entrenched political power and the promise of judicial fairness.
It really does.
We are examining the sources related to the 1999 murder of model Jessica Lal.
This is such a case study in systemic resilience, or, maybe the lack of it at first. I think our mission is clear. We need to meticulously pull together the sequence of events.
Right.
Then we have to analyze that truly shocking initial acquittal, trace the massive, sustained national reaction that came after, and then understand how the reversal of justice really showed the complex relationship between India's judiciary and its politically connected elite.
Absolutely. And the sources provided give us this painful reminder that the starting point of this whole national conversation was just a senseless, tragic loss of life.
Yes.
So before we get into analyzing the systems, we have to pause and remember Jessica Lal. She was a 34-year-old model and events organizer whose life was violently extinguished while she was simply working.
That perspective is so vital because what follows is often analyzed as this big legal battle, but at its heart, it was a fight for basic human accountability. The sources underscore right away that this became so much more than a murder investigation. It evolved into an epic test for the democratic institutions of India.
A test against what exactly?
Against extreme wealth, political clout, and a judicial system that, at first, just appeared willing to bend under all that pressure. The public response, well, it demanded nothing less than a complete reckoning.
Okay, let's trace the events of that night then. We can start with the precise location and context.
Yes.
We're in the early hours of Saturday, April 30, 1999, in New Delhi. The venue was an unlicensed bar operating inside the Qutab Colonnade restaurant.
And that was a real socialite hotspot located near the famous Qutab Minar. So you can imagine this was a very exclusive gathering, crowded with the city's well-connected.
The fact that it was an unlicensed bar seems key.
It's absolutely key. It sets the scene of entitlement, of people operating outside the normal rules. And Jessica Lal was there working, serving as a celebrity barmaid to, lend some glamour and sophistication to the private event.
So the implicit understanding was that rules were lax.
Or perhaps just non-existent for this particular clientele.
The bar was supposed to have stopped serving much earlier. According to the source materials, the legal serving time had ended at 12:30 a.m.
And the bar was completely dry by 2 a.m. It's at this point that Siddharth Vashisht, who everyone knew by his nickname, Manu Sharma, arrived with 3 of his friends.
And here we introduce the central figure of privilege. Manu Sharma wasn't just any young man.
No, he was the son of Vinod Sharma, who at the time was a powerful and very influential member of parliament for the Indian National Congress. That family name, it provided an immediate protective bubble, a context that really defines everything that happens next.
So Sharma demands to be served liquor. He demonstrates his disregard for the rules by trying to offer a bribe, 1,000 rupees for a drink.
And Jessica Lal, who was simply following the rules because the bar was closed, it was dry, she refused to serve him.
Her refusal was, it was an immediate affront to his sense of entitlement.
Completely. And Sharma's reaction was explosive. It was instantaneous. He pulls out a .22 caliber pistol.
And the first shot was fired into the ceiling. The sources explicitly label that as a purely intimidatory act.
It was a blatant display of power. He was demanding compliance through fear.
But Jessica Lal held her ground. She refused again.
And that second refusal was met with the fatal response. Sharma shot her point blank in the head. She was killed almost instantly.
The horror of that event just turned the social gathering into pandemonium.
Total chaos. The sources describe the scene dissolving, a fight breaking out as Sharma and his friends Amardeep Singh Gill, Vikas Yadav, and Ala Khanna, they just fled the scene. They left the venue and the victim behind.
This fleeing of the scene is really the first hard evidence of some kind of high-level interference, isn't it?
Absolutely. The police investigation faced immediate stonewalling. Sharma and his immediate family just vanished. They effectively absconded. The difficulty in even apprehending him signals that a protective political apparatus was mobilized within hours of the murder.
And the initial arrests took days. Khanna and Gill were brought in on May 4th.
But Manu Sharma himself wasn't apprehended until May 6th.
And what's maybe the most damning indictment of that immediate cover-up attempt is the disappearance of the physical evidence.
It is. The murder weapon was never, ever recovered. The police and investigators concluded that the pistol had been passed to an unnamed friend, reportedly a U.S. visitor, who then left the country.
Just think about the level of coordination and influence required to do that. To swiftly remove the single most crucial piece of forensic evidence from the country's jurisdiction.
It severely hampered the prosecution's case from day one.
It just speaks volumes about the sphere of influence surrounding the accused. We know Sharma's father, Vinod Sharma, was a prominent Congress MP. He did resign later, but that influence was there at the start.
And this wasn't just a solo operation of power. Vikas Yadav, one of the friends who fled with him, was the son of D.P. Yadav, another powerful state politician.
So this was an instant entanglement of political dynasties.
Exactly. And on top of that, the authorities launched a sort of parallel investigation that targeted the venue owner, the socialite Bina Ramani.
Right. Ramani, who is a UK national, her husband and her daughter Malini were all arrested.
Initially on charges related to operating the illegal bar, yes.
But the scrutiny on Ramani went further too. There were these complex inquiries into her potential role in concealing evidence.
Specifically, the allegation that she had ordered the cleaning up of the blood at the premises after the shooting. This raises a very thorny question.
Which is whether the police were genuinely seeking the truth or just trying to divert attention to a convenient secondary target.
That line of investigation against Ramani was certainly active, but it ultimately failed to stick. By mid-May, the charges related to the alleged destruction of evidence against her were formally dropped.
But the focus on the accused and their attempts to evade capture, that remained a paramount.
Yes, and we should track the maneuvering of the core suspects. An accomplice, Amit Jigan, was arrested on May 8th. He was charged with conspiracy to destroy evidence.
Specifically, he was believed to have retrieved the pistol from its initial hiding place before it vanished completely.
But the maneuvering around Vikas Yadav, the son of the state politician, is where that political leverage becomes crystal clear. Yadav was at large for weeks after the shooting.
And his eventual appearance is a textbook example of using legal loopholes that are really only enabled by influence.
It is. He secured something called anticipatory bail. Now, for listeners who might not be familiar with this legal term, anticipatory bail essentially means securing protection from arrest before you surrender to the police.
So you're securing your freedom first, and then you face the music later.
Exactly. And only the well-connected and wealthy typically manage to get that maneuver done swiftly.
He used this bail to present himself to the Delhi police on May 19th, almost 3 weeks after the crime.
And his formal statement was highly calculated. He claimed he had been out of the city, citing Mumbai and other locations, denying he was even at the party.
He said he only learned of the events the next day. He even tried to paint himself as being helpful, suggesting he had advised Sharma to surrender.
That whole carefully constructed narrative, the denied presence, the secured bail, the minimal acknowledgement, it demonstrated that from the moment the trigger was pulled, a powerful legal and political machine was actively working to insulate the accused from the normal process of law.
So the police's initial difficulties weren't because they were bad at their jobs.
No, not at all. It was due to overwhelming, coordinated political resistance that was designed from the start to compromise the case.
Despite all the high-level maneuvering and the missing weapon, the police did move forward. Charge sheets were filed relatively swiftly. On August 3, 1999, Sharma faced the major charges of murder and destruction of evidence. Yadav, Gill, Khanna, and others faced lesser but still serious charges like conspiracy and harboring a suspect.
But the timeline here is so critical. The sources highlight that the judicial process dragged on for 7 excruciatingly long years.
7 years.
And that protracted timeline itself just works to the advantage of the defense, especially when they have the resources to maintain political pressure, intimidate witnesses, and fund complex legal defenses year after year.
And during this span, the prosecution's foundation was just systematically dismantled.
It was.
Which brings us to that moment in 2006. The moment that shocked the nation and seemingly brought the entire justice system into disrepute.
On February 21st, 2006, 7 years after Jessica Lal was murdered, 9 of the 12 accused, including the man who fired the fatal shot, Manu Sharma, were acquitted.
The initial public response was just visceral disbelief, almost rage. I mean, how could a shooting that was witnessed by dozens of people in a high-profile location result in a full acquittal?
The sources are really explicit about the cause here. It wasn't based on the accused proving their innocence. It was based on the total, deliberate collapse of the prosecution's evidence base.
The root cause, laid bare in the source material, was witness hostility. An astonishing number 32 prosecution witnesses turned hostile.
And to clarify for you, when a witness turns hostile, they aren't just refusing to testify. They are formally retracting or dramatically changing the initial statements they gave to the police under oath.
So in some cases, this means they explicitly lied under oath in court. That's a crime, perjury.
Yes. And 32 such reversals, it suggests a systemic, well-funded campaign of coercion, intimidation, or just bribery. The integrity of the judicial process was basically sacrificed for political gain.
The sources even named the key figures whose reversals doomed the case. Sean Munshi, who was at the bar, was absolutely crucial.
His change of statement fundamentally undermined the police narrative. Others included Anleep Segal and Karan Rajput. Even the experts, the people responsible for objective analysis.
The ballistics experts.
Yes, the ballistics experts, Roop Singh and Prem Sagar, they contradicted or retracted their earlier forensic findings.
So when both eyewitness testimony and forensic expert opinion are systematically bought off or intimidated, the case just dissolves.
It has to, under the legal standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial judge's public remarks after the verdict essentially confirmed this deliberate failure.
Yes, the judge noted explicitly that the acquittal was necessary because the Delhi police failed to sustain the grounds on which they had built up their case.
And he focused on two massive investigative failures that came directly from that initial cover-up. First, the failure to recover the murder weapon. That remained a critical technical hurdle.
And second, this is highly technical, the police couldn't prove that the 2 cartridge shells recovered from the scene were fired from a single weapon.
Which was a direct contradiction of the police's claims. Their own forensic examination was inconclusive, or maybe even contradictory on this specific point. The defense capitalized on that ambiguity brilliantly.
How so?
They suggested a scenario where 2 different guns might have been involved, which completely shatters the clear identification of Sharma as the sole shooter.
The Hindu newspaper's report on the verdict confirmed the judge's rationale. It said the hostility of 3 key witnesses who actually saw the shooting undermined the prosecution, and that the police failed to adequately explain the chain of events.
So what the sources really allow us to see here is the consequence of allowing power to dictate the evidence. The initial corruption, hiding the weapon, pressuring the witnesses, it created these insurmountable technical difficulties years later.
So this acquittal was viewed by the public not as a failure of evidence, but as confirmation that a dual-track justice system existed.
Exactly. One system, highly effective and swift for the common person, and another one designed specifically to shield the rich and the politically connected from any accountability. The verdict confirmed the deep-seated public fear that money and power literally allowed them to get away with murder.
That initial verdict was, frankly, just gasoline poured onto already simmering public resentment. The sources detail the national shockwave it created. This wasn't a local outrage, it was a countrywide response.
It was a profound release of pent-up frustration. As the New York Times chronicled it, the acquittal released a pent-up frustration that had been building against a law enforcement bureaucracy that was perceived as endemically corrupt and incompetent.
And more significantly, the case exposed a deep disgust with the rich and famous.
Yes, the elites who seem to view themselves as untouchable by the law.
And this wasn't passive frustration. It immediately manifested in these organized, very modern forms of protest that leveraged technology and symbolic defiance.
Exactly. This was not a traditional union march or something like that. This was the modern urban middle class finding its voice. There were extensive protest campaigns coordinated via SMS messaging and email chains.
And they successfully mobilized people across different cities to seek redress for what was so clearly a miscarriage of justice.
The sources highlight the immediate visible protests, massive rallies, public marches, and perhaps most strikingly, these widespread candlelit vigils.
The candlelit vigils were deeply symbolic, weren't they?
They were. They represented a quiet, moral defiance, a refusal to let the light of truth be extinguished by the darkness of corruption. These weren't violent protests. They were demonstrations of a deep moral injury to the democratic contract.
And we see figures like Prabhlok Singh, who founded the Middle Finger protests, organizing and leading these vigils, even in Manu Sharma's political backyard.
His hometown of Chandigarh. This mobilization was a direct challenge to the authority and the immunity of the ruling elite.
The pressure became so intense it actually forced leaders within the judiciary itself to comment on the judicial failure.
Yes, the former Chief Justice of India, V.N. Kher, stepped forward. He implicitly but very clearly criticized the trial judge and the verdict, describing the case publicly as open and shut.
His intervention was momentous. This wasn't just the public voicing frustration. This was the highest echelon of the judiciary admitting a systemic failure.
And Kher made a crucial argument about judicial philosophy. He argued that when the police the prosecution, and even parts of the legal profession have connections with criminals, the judge cannot remain a passive recipient of flawed evidence.
He stated that in such compromised environments, the judge should be slightly proactive in order to get to the truth.
Right, rather than depending totally on the evidence, which was inevitably flawed or tampered with by the investigative agencies themselves.
That concept of judicial proactivity challenges the fundamental adversarial system, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests that when corruption threatens to subvert justice entirely, the judge has a moral and legal obligation to push harder, to question deeper, and to seek the truth actively, instead of just relying on the technical presentation of a compromised police file.
And that sentiment echoed the national feeling that the judge had willfully overlooked the obvious truth in favor of technical loopholes.
The administrative response followed quickly. The sources document that the Delhi police commissioner, under immense public and political pressure, announced a highly unusual internal investigation.
This internal investigation was critical. Its stated purpose wasn't just to review police procedure, but explicitly to determine where the case went wrong.
Including an examination of potential conspiracy. This meant the police were forced to investigate the suspicion that they themselves had been complicit in evidence tampering and witness corruption.
So the national outcry achieved what standard procedures could not. It forced accountability upon the investigative agencies, signaling that the political establishment could no longer ignore the collapse of trust.
With the public demanding intervention and the political establishment just reeling from the crisis, the police quickly petitioned the High Court for a review of the acquittal. The machinery of justice, which was once so static, now moved with incredible speed.
The momentum was palpable. Within weeks of the acquittal in March 2006, the High Court issued warrants against the 9 defendants who had walked free.
And while most were granted bail, there were strict restrictions. This signified that the High Court was treating them as serious flight risks and acknowledging the gravity of the charges and the public scrutiny. This swift reaction indicated the judiciary was now acutely aware of the national spotlight.
But while the High Court appeal process was underway, an independent event solidified the public's suspicions and provided undeniable evidence of the corruption that had plagued the first trial.
Yes, this was the famous sting operation conducted by the investigative news magazine Tehelka.
The Tehelka sting, which aired on Star News in September 2006, was explosive.
Completely. Investigative journalism just bypassed the police entirely and allegedly obtained footage or recordings that appeared to provide solid evidence that witnesses had indeed been bribed and coerced into retracting their testimony.
And the sources indicate that the sting explicitly named Vinod Sharma, Manu Sharma's father, as the figure who had allegedly facilitated or paid money to some of the witnesses.
This provided the tangible proof the public had long suspected. The acquittal was bought.
The political consequence was immediate and devastating to the Sharma family's influence.
Facing immense pressure from the Central Congress Party leaders, Vinod Sharma was forced to resign from the Haryana cabinet. The sting operation confirmed that the initial system failure was directly attributable to political interference and financial corruption.
So with this new evidence of corruption out in the public domain, the High Court delivered its judgment on December 15, 2006, and it was comprehensive and uncompromising.
It was. The High Court found Manu Sharma guilty based on a thorough reevaluation of the existing evidence, and it launched a scathing critique of the lower court judge, S.L. Payana.
The High Court's analysis directly challenged the lower court's assessment of witness credibility.
Right. They criticized the trial judge for being lax, specifically for dismissing the critical testimony of witnesses like Bina Ramani and Deepak Bhojwani, whose presence and observations the lower court had discounted.
The language used by the High Court was remarkably severe for a judicial review. They stated that the trial judge's manner of testing witness credibility reflected a total lack of application of mind.
And the ultimate implication, the most potent criticism, suggested that this negligence indicated a hasty approach towards securing a particular end, namely the acquittal.
That heavily implied a predisposition or bias in the lower court toward a specific predetermined outcome.
Yes, which just fueled the public perception of corruption. By rejecting the lower court's conclusions, the High Court essentially reinstated the credibility of those witnesses who had been silenced or dismissed. They found that Ramani and Pudwani's evidence, when examined correctly, was reliable and corroborated the details of the crime.
And the High Court focused keenly on the key hostile witness who had torpedoed the first trial, Chayan Munshi.
They meticulously dismantled Munshi's changed story, declaring his new version a complete lie.
The court specifically addressed Munshi's highly suspicious claim that his initial statement, the First Information Report, or FIR, was recorded in Hindi.
A language he later claimed he didn't properly understand. The High Court stated unequivocally that they do not find this explanation of Munshi to be convincing, arguing it was a manufactured excuse to invalidate his original truthful statement.
Furthermore, they rejected Munshi's elaborate, later assertion that 2 different guns were involved in the shooting,
which was a narrative designed to confuse the identity of the shooter. The High Court's ruling was definitive, asserting, "We have no manner of doubt that on this aspect he is telling a complete lie."
And that ruling confirmed that Munshi and others had deliberately committed perjury. They acted as instruments of the cover-up.
Just 5 days later, on December 20, 2006, the High Court moved to sentencing. Manu Sharma was sentenced to life imprisonment and fined.
And the other primary accused involved in the flight and cover-up, Vikas Yadav and Amardeep Singh Gill.
They received 4 years rigorous imprisonment, along with fines, for their roles in conspiracy and harboring a suspect.
The distinction in sentencing is important for legal context. You said rigorous imprisonment.
Yes, which means they were sentenced to confinement that includes hard labor, marking their secondary roles as serious auxiliary offenses.
And a request for the death penalty for Sharma was rejected.
It was. The court reasoned that while the murder was intentional, it was not premeditated. It was an act committed in sudden rage following a refusal, and so Sharma was not deemed a threat to society in a way that warrants the rarest of rare punishment.
Predictably, Sharma's defense lawyer immediately announced an intention to appeal the High Court decision to the Supreme Court.
And they specifically argued against the ruling that Beena Ramani was a valid and credible witness. But by this time, the national mood and the judicial consensus had decisively turned against that protective political structure.
So the final legal battleground was the Supreme Court of India. And on April 19, 2010, after years of appeal, the Supreme Court confirmed the sentences handed down by the High Court.
This provided the conclusive legal closure on the case.
The Supreme Court's finding was based on a synthesis of evidence that went beyond just eyewitness accounts.
Yes, they determined that the totality of evidence, the incident itself, the credible testimonies, the forensic evidence connecting the vehicles and cartridges to Sharma, and critically, Sharma's conduct immediately after the shooting.
The fleeing and the evidence destruction.
All of it. It proved his guilt beyond reasonable doubt. They specifically endorsed the High Court, confirming that it had analyzed all the evidence and arrived at the correct conclusion.
During the Supreme Court proceedings, the defense, led by the renowned senior advocate Ram Jethmalani, launched a major final argument.
The trial by media argument.
Exactly. They alleged that the media had relentlessly campaigned against Sharma, thereby prejudicing the entire legal process.
And this is such a crucial element for understanding the balance of power in modern democracies. The Supreme Court acknowledged that there had been an element of intense, even sensational trial by media around the case.
Which is understandable, given the intensity of the public outcry.
Of course. But, and this is the vital legal distinction, they concluded that this media coverage had not affected the rigorous legal decision-making process of the High Court. The verdict was upheld on the law and the evidence, not on public pressure.
Which allowed the judiciary to defend its independence while still delivering justice.
Precisely.
So after 11 years, justice was formally served. But the story of Manu Sharma continued, even from inside Tihar jail, especially regarding the controversial topic of his paroles.
The source material details several instances where his connections and privilege just seemed to follow him, even into incarceration. In September 2009, Sharma was granted an initial 30-day parole.
Which was then extended by another 30 days.
Yes. The official justification was compassionate leave to attend to his sick mother and manage family business matters.
But the public optics were disastrous. During this extended period of freedom, Sharma was widely reported as being seen partying in a nightclub.
Which completely undermined the compassionate reasons given for his temporary release. And on top of that, his mother, the reason for his release, was seen attending public functions.
He did surrender 2 weeks early, but the incident just fueled public suspicion that his privilege continued to grant him special treatment unavailable to ordinary convicts.
There was a later smaller controversy, though less scandalous. From December 2013 to January 2014, he was granted limited parole specifically to allow him to sit for his master's degree examinations in Delhi.
And while education is a goal of incarceration, the continued special allowances granted to a man convicted of such a high-profile murder kept the flames of public dissatisfaction burning.
It was all about the preferential treatment afforded to the rich.
And the final official twist in the story of Manu Sharma came a decade later. Despite the life sentence, he was released from Tihar jail by the Delhi lieutenant governor in June 2020. The official rationale was good behavior.
His release essentially closes the legal arc concerning the primary perpetrator. But the legacy of the case required one final chapter of systemic self-correction.
Addressing the corruption that allowed the acquittal to happen in the first place.
The perjury charges against the hostile witnesses. That cleanup began in earnest in February 2011, when it was announced that all 32 hostile witnesses would potentially face charges of perjury for lying under oath.
That step was absolutely crucial for restoring faith in the judicial process.
It was. It showed that the courts were not only correcting the outcome of the murder trial, but also addressing the underlying corruption. By May 2013, the Delhi High Court ordered the official prosecution of the two most critical figures who had helped collapse the original trial.
Bollywood actor Shan Munshi and the ballistic expert P.S. Manocha.
For turning hostile.
It's interesting to note that the High Court cleared 17 other individuals whose alleged hostile positions were under review.
And that shows the court was focusing its resources on prosecuting the most egregious and willful acts of deception, those that fundamentally altered the course of justice. Rather than mounting some indiscriminate campaign against all 32, it was a targeted effort.
When a tragedy evolves into a national movement, it naturally permeates the cultural landscape. The Jessica Lal case became a benchmark reference point for discussing judicial failure and systemic corruption in India.
Its resonance was immediate and powerful. The sources confirmed the incident's influence on popular culture, most notably the 2011 Hindi film No One Killed Jessica.
Right, with Rani Mukherjee and Vidya Balan. That film directly dramatized the long, frustrating legal struggle and the public mobilization for justice.
But the influence extended beyond just a direct retelling. It informed the themes of other major works, like the 2016 novel Six Suspects by Vikas Swarup,
which centered on a murder with a strikingly similar premise. A powerful elite protege killing a barmaid in a Delhi party setting.
And we also see the 2008 film Hala Bol, which drew thematic inspiration from the case's central conflict, corruption, judicial compromise, and the subsequent public outcry demanding accountability.
The cultural output surrounding this case confirms its permanent status as a symbol. It's no longer just a legal file.
No, it represents that critical fault line between the privileged few and the common public seeking equality under the law. For you listening, the knowledge to pull together here is clear. The case became a litmus test for India's democracy.
Reviewing the entire trajectory, it just shows the incredible cost of complacency. An initial catastrophic failure, that 2006 acquittal, which exposed the ability of political influence and wealth to manipulate witnesses and evidence, was ultimately overcome.
And that correction required 4 distinct steps. Massive, sustained, and coordinated public pressure. A successful, sensational investigative journalism effort that provided concrete proof of corruption.
A High Court and Supreme Court willing to withstand political pressure and conduct rigorous judicial review.
And finally, the effort to prosecute the very individuals who committed perjury to sabotage the initial trial. It demonstrates that the system can be corrected, but only when it's pushed to the absolute breaking point by the active intervention of its citizenry.
And we return to the victim, Jessica Lal, whose senseless death propelled this critical nationwide conversation about systemic failure and the fight for true accountability in India. Her loss became a catalyst.
Indeed. The pursuit of justice for her life inadvertently exposed the complex mechanisms of power that operated outside and often above the formal law.
Here is the final thought for you to consider. Based on the complexities, delays, and necessary public mobilization we have detailed in the sources, the initial flawed verdict took 7 years.
The reversal required a massive, coordinated public campaign and a groundbreaking media expose.
Even after conviction, controversies surrounding parole and special treatment persisted. When a failure of justice is caused by entrenched power and wealth, what is the true enduring cost measured not just in money but in time, public energy, and erosion of faith required to push that system back onto the rails and ensure the rule of law prevails?
That defining question is the true legacy of this exhaustive legal struggle.
Thank you for joining us for this thorough examination of the sources.
It has been a vital discussion to synthesize.
Thanks for listening.